In the midst of ongoing tensions in Minnesota over federal immigration enforcement, President Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, announced a plan that could see a reduction, or drawdown, of Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) and other federal immigration personnel operating in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, but he tied any significant reduction in boots on the ground to what he described as cooperation from state and local officials. Homan, who was dispatched by the White House to oversee operations after a series of controversial incidents, including the fatal shooting of a civilian protester by a federal agent, said at a press conference that he and his team had been holding discussions with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, as well as local law enforcement leaders, to find a path toward de-escalation and improved community safety. Homan repeatedly emphasized that fewer agents would be needed if state and local authorities would share custody information about individuals in county jails who are subject to immigration detainers, allowing ICE to take custody of such individuals in a secure setting rather than chasing them in the community, a change he argued would reduce street contacts and therefore the need for hundreds or thousands of federal agents. He said that agreements with local officials to notify ICE in advance of releases would make enforcement safer, more efficient, and by the book, and that this common-sense cooperation could result in a drawdown of personnel assigned to what the administration has called Operation Metro Surge, an expansive federal mission that deployed roughly 3,000 ICE and Customs and Border Protection officers to the region. Homan stressed that he would remain in Minnesota until the problem's gone, even as he framed the drawdown as a near-term possibility contingent on further collaboration and declines in violence or unrest. The backdrop to this announcement includes weeks of intense controversy and public outcry after it was reported that at least 2 U.S. citizens, most recently a 37-year-old ICU nurse, were fatally shot during immigration enforcement operations in Minneapolis, sparking protests, legal challenges, and calls from state leaders for the federal government to withdraw agents entirely. Video evidence and subsequent reporting have raised serious questions about the circumstances of those shootings, with local officials and activists disputing initial federal claims that the individuals posed imminent threats, intensifying criticism of the aggressive enforcement tactics used. In response, Minnesota Governor Walz has publicly urged a full removal of federal agents, calling the actions excessive and inhumane, and leveraging pressure from both political and community leaders to force a recalibration of federal strategy. The situation has also led to political clashes, with Trump accusing local leadership of undermining law enforcement and sanctuary city policies, while legal experts have pointed out that cities and states cannot be compelled to enforce federal immigration laws, a position rooted in decades of legal precedent. Homan's remarks reflect a tactical shift from broad, street-level sweeps toward more targeted, strategic enforcement, focusing on individuals who have committed serious crimes or pose public safety threats, rather than indiscriminate encounters with anyone suspected of being in the country without authorization. He repeatedly defended the legitimacy of ICE's mission while acknowledging that no agency is perfect, and improvements are needed, even as he rejected characterizations that the administration was ceding ground to local resistance. The border czar also made clear that a reduction in enforcement agents on the streets would not equate to an abandonment of federal immigration policy objectives but rather a realignment of tactics in the face of public backlash and logistical realities on the ground. He argued that when county jails honor ICE detainers and notify federal authorities of release dates, fewer agents are required to roam the streets looking for potential immigration violators, thereby reducing friction with communities and making operations more orderly and lawful. Still, despite this talk of drawdown, Homan stressed that federal agents would remain in place as long as problems persisted and that full cooperation with state jails and local law enforcement would be necessary to justify any significant scale back. He framed his stay in Minneapolis as part of a long-term effort to regain order and restore safety while continuing to pursue immigration enforcement priorities. Homan's comments also included a critique of what he called hateful rhetoric and obstruction aimed at ICE officers, warning that such hostility could undermine safety and make operations more difficult, a position echoed in some conservative media narratives. The Trump administration's stance reflects a broader national debate over immigration policy, sanctuary jurisdictions, and the proper role of federal law enforcement, with both sides of the political spectrum using Minnesota as a flashpoint for larger ideological battles. Public reaction has been deeply divided. Advocates for immigrant rights and critics of federal overreach have called for a complete withdrawal of ICE operations and for accountability for officers involved in deadly incidents, while supporters of the administration's tough enforcement line argue that reducing federal presence without guaranteed cooperation would embolden criminal elements and weaken the rule of law. Local officials, particularly in Minneapolis and St. Paul, have called for independent investigations into the shootings and have sought clarity on how their jurisdictions can both protect civil liberties and maintain public safety. Lawmakers at the state and federal levels are closely watching developments, and the situation has sparked lawsuits, demonstrations, and widespread media coverage arguing over federal authority, community autonomy, policing practices, and executive power. As of the latest updates, the plan for a drawdown remains conditional, with Homan reiterating that any reduction in ICE agents will depend largely on the level of cooperation from Minnesota's state and local officials, especially in how they handle detainees and communicate with federal authorities. Until such agreements are fully solidified and implemented, the federal government's presence remains substantial, and Homan's mission continues with a mix of diplomatic discussion and firm enforcement rhetoric. The broader implications of this shift, both for immigration policy nationwide and for community federal relations in Minnesota, are still unfolding as public discourse, legal challenges, and political maneuvering play out against a backdrop of tension and uncertainty.